Okay, what is up, guys? Back at it again with the #1 game development podcast on YouTube, the only one that is. And this time I'm here with Jorg. He has a lot of things to share with us, and I'm not going to stall, so I'm going to let him introduce himself, where he is from, what he is doing, and we're going to take off from there. So be my guest, brother.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, my name is Jörg Winterstein. I'm 39 years old. I live in South Germany and I'm creating games for a living, and I've done so for the last 20 years. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Now, before we started this podcast and we got to talking, your portfolio is quite impressive. So you work in quite a bit of game studios. So share your experience, like how is it to work there, and mention a few that you worked, like where, like the one that left the best experience with you. So talk a little bit, yeah.
Okay. I just started at the beginning when it was in the early 2000s, when I was a trainee or apprentice at a company that created normal tool software. And since I was a child, I've always wanted to create games, like I think most of the people watching your stream do. And I maybe if it's interesting, I'll talk a bit about my child experience later. But for the moment, because you asked for the companies, I switched working on a company in Darmstadt, which is near Frankfurt, a big city in Germany. There's also a Crytek is from Frankfurt area. Um, and in the early 2000s, there were not many game studios out there, and it was luck for me to get an apprenticeship at a games company, and it was a very small studio. It doesn't exist today. I'll talk a bit about it later, but this was my start into working at a game company, and I have all the expectations that you have, like, oh, I'm finally starting to work on games. I can tell all my friends I've managed to get into the video games industry, and I was very proud at the moment. I was super motivated, and it was indeed one of the best companies that I've ever worked on, because it was my start into the industry. And the thing was that um, I started there, and the first question was, what game am I going to work on? And it was sort of I don't know if you know the game Road Rash from the Genesis. It was a racing game with bicycles where you can knock out other people on their bikes. And the game I was going to work on was some sort of clone of that game, if you want to say it like this. And I was absolutely excited to work on this. And it was a great atmosphere. There were only 5-6 people working there. The company was named Spielkind at the time, which translates to play child, if you want. And I started working on a game for the Game Boy Advanced. Yeah, where I thought, oh, I start working on games. I start working on a console game. It was absolutely brilliant. But unfortunately, the game was cancelled before it was released. And from that point on, the titles where I had to work on, they didn't become more exciting. But the opposite was the case, because in Germany back then, there were no many big companies that worked on great games. They were just very small productions. And so I worked on a game for a German TV show called Medicopter. It's about a helicopter doing medical rescue stuff. And it was not the type of action game that I wanted to work on. And when I told my friends I'm working on games, they asked, are you working on Call of Duty? No, I don't. Are you working on Assassin's Creed? No. Are you working on Pro Evolution Soccer? No. But you said you're working on games. What are you doing? And I said, yeah, well, in Germany, it's a bit different. But nevertheless, I learned very much back in those days, because the founders of the company, they were very experienced guys back at the time already. They've worked on many games in the past. And unfortunately, the company changed quite a bit, and closed its doors a few years later. And my experience during the time was that at some points I always thought, maybe the decisions that were made in the company, what game to do next, or what deal to strike, or what the conditions are for those deals, I didn't think they were ideal at the time. And I'm not saying I would have done it better than they did, but I always thought, maybe I would have chosen a different approach to what they are doing. So when the company closed its doors, I wanted to start my own company, because I thought maybe I can do it better than they did, maybe not, we will see. And so a few former colleagues and me, we created our own company, and we started doing browser games. And we were funded by a big company. They are called Gameforge. I'm not sure if you know them. They were very big in Germany with browser games, and now they are doing mobile games as well. And so we had an idea. We pitched a project to them, and they said they liked the idea. We should do this game. Then we made contracts. We started working on the game. We were super happy that we had our own company. We can create our own game, our own ideas. And just weeks after we signed, then they said, listen guys, we like your idea and the game might be great, but let's take a little less risk, because our game was very unlikely at the moment. It was, we didn't want to copy other games. We wanted to try out new ideas. It's like what indie game developers are trying nowadays every day. But it was too risky for the company who gave us the money. So they said, let's do a more traditional approach first. And after this game is successful, we can create your game. And so we changed during the production and created a totally different game. We tried to use the technique that we have created, but it was another game. So the thing was, after the game was released, it wasn't successful from the first game day on. And then the company said, okay, that's it. We're canceling your company. And we said, hey, look, you said we're doing another game. And yes, that was just, it was a bit difficult, yeah. And back at the time, I was very pissed because I thought they just let us down and they betrayed us. But from a today's perspective, it was perfect, because I'm here what I'm doing now because of what happened in the past. So my next idea was, okay, I was working at a company. I wasn't pleased there. I was creating a company with other guys and it didn't work out well. So the next step would be to create my own company. This was back in 2011. It was the time where all the mobile gaming stuff was starting to evolve and getting really big. So I was able to get some sort of state funding. In Germany, there's the possibility to either to become jobless and get, I don't know the English word, you get 1 year of money from the government if you have no job, but you can also start your own business and you get the money that you normally get when you're unemployed to start your own business 1 year. So I said, I take the money and I start my own company. That's when I started working in mobile games. And the first thing I wanted to do was create...
You were alone at that time when you started?
I'm most of the time, for the last 10 years, I'm working alone.
So you do all the artwork, all the music, everything?
Yes, basically, yes. I'll go into detail onto that later, but what I tried to do was to see if I can do it on my own. And if that doesn't work, then it's because of me and I go back to a normal day job and work whatever I do. But I wanted to take the risk and try it. And that's when I started creating the Blue Kit game that you might have seen.
Yeah, we will talk about it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea was to create a classic game that I would like to play myself. Like everyone says, I'm just creating games I love to play myself and stuff like that. And it didn't work out quite well at the beginning. It was a total disaster. The good thing was I worked on it for about 3 months before I released the first version. And it was absolutely unsuccessful. And then
what backfired?
It was... I placed it on the App Store as a premium app for I think it was 39 cents at the time. It was the lowest price category. And at that time, every company that was entering the App Store was trying to go for the lowest price ever. There were no premium apps for $5. In the beginning of the App Store, everyone was using the lowest price possible. And so there were really, even back in the days, great productions with great high production value also available for $1. So it was very difficult for a retro game like Blue Kit. And so then I started to think what I think is important for a company, I'll talk about this later, that you don't need just your game developer kind of view when you're doing a company like this, but you also need to think economically. You need to think what's the market.
And the marketing side.
Exactly. So, and I myself, I'm not that much of a marketing guy. I always want to focus on games, of course, but you you can't get rid of it. You need to do stuff that's not that super exciting.
Yeah, how will people download your game if they don't know you?
Exactly, that's exactly the way. What I did when Blue Kit was a disaster at first, I thought, okay, what can I do next? What do I have? What's my possibilities in the App Store? What do people want in the App Store? Stuff like this. At the time, even today, there's still this conversation: is it good for small kids to play on tablets, or is it better to go outside? Stuff like that. Everybody needs to decide that for himself and for his kids. But I thought, if you're a parent and if you take care of your child and you sit beside him with him and play games, no matter what games, it works. Yeah, because I myself, I was playing games all the time when I was a kid. Of course, I was playing with my friends. It was not online. It was in the same room. It was different than today. But basically, even my parents were scared that he's just playing games. What will become of him? Oh my God. Yeah. But if you take care and you take the time to check out the stuff that your kid is playing, I don't think there's a problem at all. And so I thought maybe there are parents out there who think like this. So I started creating games for kids on tablets. And back at the time, I didn't have children of my own. I have 3 now. But back then I had a nephew and a niece, and they were 3 to 5 years old. So I started talking with them what kind of games they would like to see on a tablet. And they told me, I need an animal farm. You need to touch the animals. They must make sound and stuff like that. And like, okay, I'll do it for you. And so I basically created on one weekend a farming scene where there are animals that you can press, and they loved it. So I just uploaded it to the App Store, and it was downloaded, I think, 20,000 times on one weekend alone.
Just by you uploading, you didn't market
yes,
it.
I must say it was a free app, and the idea I had was, as always, what will people type into the search if they want to find a game like this? So I thought, okay, farm animals is something that every kid likes. So I called the app Farm Animals for Toddlers. And I chose some keywords like funny stuff, baby, child, education, whatever. And then I got the downloads. And then my next thought was, okay, I got many people playing this thing, but it's free. How can I make money from it? So I thought, okay, there's one scene with the farm animals you get for free. And when you do an in-app purchase, you get 3, 4, 5 additional scenes with a one-time purchase, no subscription or no ongoing costs, just one purchase, and you have all the stuff. And did an update to the app with, I think, 3 more scenes, and it worked out extremely well. So people were downloading the free app, and I think 10 or 15% of the people bought the full version, which is an extremely high conversion rate by today's standards.
How much downloads in total did that app get for you, that game?
I've had a look before our interview. This animal app, I must say, it was released in 2011, so it's over 8 years old now. It has nearly 700,000 downloads at the moment. And back in the days when I released it, I didn't know anything about conversion rates or daily active users or return whatever. And I don't really care about these things today's either. I know they exist, and there are specialists working in companies just checking the numbers, analyzing the stats, and see how can I have a user and play 1 more minute of the game and stuff like that. I'm not interested in that. I know that this can really help drive more traffic and get more users engaged in your game. But it's always a trade-off between, do they really play your game because they like it, or are you tricking them with some incentives or whatever?
Exactly, that's the difference between indies and companies. Like indie developers, they create a game from their heart, not like money is not on the first place. Of course, it's important. You need to earn money to continue to create games, but you created it because of love. It's not only profit.
Yeah, that's it. But it's important to think about this stuff, because it depends on what situation you're in. There are people, they go to school, or they're studying, or they live alone, and they can spend their free time creating games. But there are people who need to pay off their house, they need to pay for the children, and then it's very risky to say, I don't care about the money, I just want to have fun. It all comes together. Of course, when you're creating a game and you don't know how your chances are at the end, it's always good if your game is a fail, that at least the time while you created the game was fun for you. Because it's bad if you create a game and think, I don't like it at all, I just do it because I need the money, and it doesn't work out, then everything's shit. But if you have fun, then at least you had a year of creating a fun game. Yeah. But
exactly, that's the most important thing, especially in game development, that you have fun. That's what I tell to my audience all the time. I mean, you need to love this. Like people ask me, even in person, some people that I know, they're like, oh, if I start to learn what you learned, can I learn it in 2 months? I'm like, dude, if you do not love it, you will never learn it, because you will just be pushing yourself because you see me and you think that I'm successful and you think that I don't know, earn good money, make a good living, and you want to replicate that. It's not about if you do something good. First of all, if you love it, and if you do it good, the money will come. It's mandatory. It's impossible for the money not to come if you do something that's great. And you can do only great work if you love it. Now, before we proceed to talk more about your game and your indie journey, I want to revert back to two more things. When you talked about working in companies, you mentioned like at the time that you were not satisfied with the contracts that they were getting. Were there like independent like studios that they were creating their own games, or they like got their I don't know, funding from other companies and created the games that those companies told them, like freelancer work, something like that?
It was back in the time. It was really there were no indie game developers. The basic company in Germany, and I think in most parts of the world, were companies working for publishers that either on the one company maybe have pitched a project that they designed, and the publisher said, oh, that's great, I want to create this. But most of the people had projects that the publishers wanted to be created and created that for them. And the company I was working at was exactly the same. They had contracts, and like that Medicopter game I was talking about, it was a project from a big television company in Germany.
And they pitched that to you, and
they were searching for a team to create that game. And it's always the publisher has an idea and says, okay, you create a pitch for my idea, and if I like what you are trying to create for me, I will let you create it. That's what happened. Yeah.
What game engine, what framework was used back then? That was like you said, 2000, 2001, 2, 3. That's like more than 15, 17, 18 years ago.
If I remember it correctly, it was a 3D game engine called Ogre Engine. It was a C++ open source engine back at the time. It was one of the only free available engines out there.
Did Unity exist at that time?
Sorry?
Did Unity exist at that time? Because I think Unreal was paid.
Unity existed, but you can't compare it to today. It was very basic. You could not debug anything. I already had experience with Unity back. No, don't get me wrong. I had Unity experience a few years ago. I don't know if Unity existed in the early 2000s. We need to check this later, maybe. But if it existed, it would have been no choice for us, because it was very limited, and you can't compare it to today. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to bash Unity. Unity is very great.
No, of course.
Some of the best games of the last 10 years were created with Unity. We don't need to talk about this.
Of course.
But what happened to us was that, of course, we always had to do contract work, and then we managed to have some spare time, or we managed to hold back some money from the publishers. So we had the chance to take 2 or 3 months off and create our own game, which was a match 3 game, actually. Back in the days when nobody knew what a match 3 game really is, there was no Candy Crush Saga or whatever. And we created the game ourselves like an independent developer, and then we sold the license for the game to different companies, so they could rebrand it and sell it as their product,
as their own,
like a white label app, if you want. And that was an extremely brilliant idea, and all the money that we needed to create the game came back in when we sold the game to other companies. Nice. And so my first idea was, hey, we must keep going on and doing exactly that thing, because it's working, it's fun, and it's our own stuff. And you can build up multiple titles. You can still relicense the old game to other companies while creating new stuff. But somehow the management, I don't know why, they didn't pursue that idea, they went back to contract work. And it's a thing that I've always wanted to talk with the guys from back then, because what you must know, in every company that I've ever worked with, there were always extremely polite and funny people. I've always liked most of the people I've worked with, because at least in Germany, the game dev industry on the one part is very small. If you ever worked in one company, chances are you already know 50% of all the people, because you go to parties, to Christmas parties, you meet other guys, and there's the saying, when you go how do you say it? A chain of 5 people, you know everyone in the world. If you go LinkedIn, whatever. But in the gaming industry, if you know 1, 2, 3, 4 main people, you basically have connection to everyone.
Yeah, that's what I'm telling people over here. Like, being a developer is rare today, even though in this technological world it's rare to find somebody like a skilled guy. I'm not saying like anybody can like watch a few tutorials on YouTube and say I can create games, but a skilled guy that can actually do the work, they are rare. And this is what people don't realize, especially when it comes to job hunting. This is what I want to talk about with you. But before I talk about that, you mentioned that you worked on Darksiders for 2 months. Now, even though it was only 2 months, I mean, Darksiders, it's a game that probably every single person has heard of who plays games. Talk just a little bit about that experience, because I think it will be very interesting for the audience who are listening to this to hear about, like, how was it to work on such a famous game?
Okay, just one thing before, I worked on the Darksiders remastered version, which was created. It was released 2 or 3 years ago for the PS4, the Xbox One, and the Switch. And not on the original Darksiders, unfortunately. By now, I know the people that created the original Darksiders game. Just like I said, even in the international industry, you know everyone. If you go to a convention, people are always willing to talk to you. There is no, I'm up here and you're down there, I don't talk to you. It just doesn't happen. I've had a personal talk with Joe Madeira, who created the Darksiders franchise, the creative director, art director, whatever. And he's an absolutely normal guy. He's very nice. These guys, they put on their trousers one leg at a time, just like we do. There's no hierarchy like that in the industry as I know it. Of course, I can only talk about my personal experience, but all the people working on games, they are just cool guys and girls, of course. And so what happened was that I've created my own games in the past, and I've really made a living out of these games. Then, as I mentioned, I've got 3 kids at the moment. I think maybe it will stay like this, I hope. And so I have a house that I need to pay off. And my wife, she's a teacher. And when our 3rd child was born, she wanted to take 1 more year off from work so she can really be there for our last child. And so there was 1 year where she had no income, and I had to financial everything myself. I had to pay all the bills. And so I thought, maybe the app store is changing. It's getting difficult. It would be good for me to do some contract work besides my normal income, so I have enough money to pay all the bills. And that's when my idea was, okay, of course, I want to work in the gaming industry. And like I said, everyone knows everyone. So for me, it was very easy to get a connection to people who are currently looking for programmers. And that's when I found the Darksiders project. And they said, okay, look, we are doing the remaster version. They did HD graphics. They did a complete engine switch. They used their own 3D engine. And they needed someone to take care of all the user interface stuff. And the Darksiders crew decided to use Adobe Flash. I don't know if you remember it. It's pretty dead for game development, but there is some sort of middleware. And for those watchers who don't know what middleware in terms of game development is, middleware is some sort of library or framework that it's not a full-fledged engine, but it's a piece that you can use, like the Fmod library for sound, or I forgot the name, what I was working with, but there is a technique which allows you to create animations in Adobe Flash, because there are a lot of artists using Flash still, and you can export it into a format that you can use in your game engine. And there are implementations for Unity, I guess, for the Unreal Engine and stuff. So you don't need to have your own editor for user interface effects. You can just use Adobe Flash and bring that into your game. And Scaleform is the name of the middleware, I think. And so they were looking for someone who wants to dive into that Scaleform stuff and update the user interface things for Darksiders. And I said, okay, I've never heard of this before, but I think I can do it. So I joined them for 2 months and worked on all the user interface stuff. And of course, there were then connections into the game because you need to display game buttons according to the platform that you're on. On the PlayStation, you see other button images like on the Xbox. And so, of course, there was an interaction with the game code and with the game coders, also with the artists, because they were redoing all the user interface graphics and stuff. And it was a company called Kaiko Games. They were creating that remastered version. And they are a very small team. They have, I think, 3 or 4 programmers, but they are, like you said before, they are extremely experienced and talented people. And they've worked on multiple games in the past. Yeah, so you can feel that there's one coder can do the job of 5 newcomers in a shorter amount of time. And I'll continue talking about this in a second, but it's important for me to notice that one of the very important things is to know about the basic stuff, how games are working, because such a thing like this Darksiders Remastered, if you say, I've got a lot of Unity experience, I've worked on a game before, it has nothing to do with a real AAA title that was created in C++ or something like that. And
this is what I wanted to talk to, the process of hiring people, because, we all know who has ever searched for a job, and I don't know why, but later on, like this was in the beginning, but later on I found out that the companies don't actually post these jobs. They just hire somebody to do that from the HR or however they are called. Yeah. And these people have no idea what they're doing when it comes to, they're like, we need a guy for Unity game development, but he needs to know C#, Java, C++, Python. I mean, what the kind of guy doesn't exist, and people back away from those types of jobs. Like nobody wants to apply. Oh, I don't know this, but actually, in reality, like if they list 10 things and you know one, but as you said, you know how to do games. This is what people don't. They think that they need to know everything, and especially when it comes to game development, what I'm telling people, what they don't understand, the companies are hiring you mostly based on your skill to learn something new and learn it quickly. When I say quickly, I don't mean like learn it in a week, but you're able to learn a new framework and adapt to it. That's the main skill that you should have when it comes to a program job.
Absolutely, yeah. So when I said I didn't know anything about the Scaleform stuff, and I knew I could do it, that's what you're talking about. But of course, you need a good foundation, a basic understanding of some stuff to be able to understand other things. Yeah, and that's exactly what happened with the Scaleform things. I had a hard time at the beginning because Flash is limited. It has an own JavaScripting type of language where you can do stuff, but as always, nothing worked as expected. So of course, we managed to do it in the end, but it wasn't an easy task, even though it looked like one in the first place. Look at the game and you got all the graphics. The artists are creating just an HD variant of the textures. You just need to replace the textures and do some basic coding. And then I noticed, no, it's not as easy as that. But like you said, the ability to get into stuff and to learn stuff, and especially to focus on things, is very important. And when you want to apply for a job, the best thing to demonstrate that you're able to do things like this is to build up a portfolio of your stuff. And what is extremely important is that you're able to finish things that you once started, because I see a lot of guys starting with Unity, and with Unity, the trap is that you start seeing results instantly, and you buy some plugins, you copy and paste some code from Stack Overflow, and suddenly you have a third-person shooter type of game after a few days, and you think that at this pace you can keep going on, but that's not true, because you will always come to a point where you need to modify a plugin that you've bought, or try to understand a piece of code that you're using, and you're not able to wrap your mind around it because you're lacking the basics and the fundamentals. And that's when people then start scrapping their stuff and I'll do something new. And then each half year they start working on a new project, and they start thinking bigger and bigger and want to create the next Dark Souls or whatever. But they never finish at least a Pong-like game or a Tetris game or whatever.
The all famous shiny object syndrome. This is what I talk about a lot. And exactly this is, because I run an education business, because from where I am, it's very hard to find people to collaborate on a game. Even though I have one friend here and he lives near me, he works on Warframe. Hear the game? Warframe? Yeah, all of his, like, the best-selling skins and characters are his. So he's very talented. Okay. Yeah, he's really very good. But the issue is, like, even if we started something, it will be hard to create something like in a short span of time. I'm talking like something decent, not like at the level of AAA, but something that's really cool that can, compete in the App Store. So I released a couple of my own games, but that's where I realized, as you said, I need to pay the bills, and I had no idea about marketing and so on and so forth. But I am good. I'm really, really good at one thing. I can learn anything when it comes to programming. Most of the science, a lot of things I can learn really quickly. I'm just bragging a little bit, but just talking regular conversation. And I can explain what I know to other people very good. That's why I started my education business, because when I started to learn game development, you said in your time, you probably had no resources at all, especially that was the early days of the internet. I can assume that the game engine that you used back then had no resources whatsoever. You had to learn it from the people there directly, So it's hard for people to learn. And one of the things that I'm telling them all the time, learn the fundamentals. I'm teaching you the fundamentals, laying the fundamentals, because when you understand the fundamentals, you said, when it comes to programming, you understand what is a class, what is a function, how object-oriented programming works, how that system works, how you can put it together to create a game, to have a functional game. That's the most important thing, because that's the foundation. After that, you can build upon, you can, switch to other game engines, you can adapt, like the ability to learn something else. I always compare that with the fact, like, when you learn to drive a car. I mean, you can learn to drive a BMW, but when you sit down in a Mercedes, it's have the same steering wheel, gas pedal. Yeah. That's the concept. So thank you for bringing that up for people to hear from a real expert, the person who spent like 20 years in the industry. So thank you very much for bringing that up. Now I want to switch back to your game and talk about, and let me first just share the screen over here to your game that you have pre-release or pre-order, the Bloo Kid 2. So I'm assuming there's also Kid 1. Yeah. And okay, talk about the game. How did you get to the idea? What is your game about? I will also put here, like, I will preview this short gameplay while you're talking. So go ahead, brother.
Okay, so as you can see, it's basically a standard platforming game with a retro aesthetics, and the game is a mixture of all the games that I loved in the past, and I've been inspired by some well-known games. It's the aesthetics, the looks, the sound, the gameplay, the level mechanics. It all exists in older games, and it's one of the thing that many critics point out and say the game has no inspirational. It's not inspirational at all. It has no own ideas. It's not creative and stuff like that. For me, it's like a mega mix of all the games I loved and what I've always wanted to do. It's a 2D platformer with a heavy focus on timing and precision. What I pay most attention to when creating games is the core game mechanic, because what, as you said, what you build up on that game comes later. If the main action that you perform all the time isn't fun at all, or is not precise or whatever, no one will play it. So I've seen a lot of great looking games that look brilliantly on screenshots, because there are millions of talented people out there creating artwork, pixel art, whatever. But if you put it together and it doesn't feel right, then the game is no good. And so with Bloo Kid, I started focusing on the core gameplay, on the movement. I think I spent 30% of the time with the player movement and the jumping height and the feeling when you bounce off enemies, and the rest of the time was put into other things. But when creating a game, the fundamentals are important. It's gameplay wise, it's the same. And what happened was that Blue Kid 1, the first part was available as mobile game only. And like I mentioned before, I released it and it was no big success. And then I created those kids apps, and the kids apps were brilliantly working for me financial wise. And back then I came back to Blue Kid and tried to adapt the same pricing model that I use for the children's apps. Get the app for free and then pay a minimum to get the rest of the levels. And that worked better, but not quite good at all. And so I changed it back and made the game completely free on mobile and put in advertising, because in my kids apps, I never put in advertising because I hate it when kids play apps and they have advertising in it. Even if nowadays there are compliances that there are apps targeted at children and stuff like that, I don't want to see any advertising in an app for children. That's why I don't do it in my apps. But with Blue Kid, of course it has a childish look if you want it, but it aims at normal hardcore players if you want to. And
all the Game Boy players.
Yeah, exactly. So that are grown-ups now. So what happened was that I once again made up my mind and thought, if people want to play a game like Super Mario on the iPhone, which didn't exist until a few years, they are going to search for Mario in the App Store. And so I chose the keyword Mario what happened was, when someone was searching for Mario in the App Store, he found my game as the first search result. And that's when the downloads exploded. And the funny thing is, nowadays, you are not allowed to use Mario or Sonic or whatever as a keyword in the App Store.
They trademarked it.
Yeah, exactly. You get a notice that this keyword is not allowed. But back in the days, it was available. That, of course, it was a mixture of my idea and a bit of luck that it worked. But that's what I mean by, you have to a certain degree, you need to think about stuff like that. How are people going to find your game? You don't have any money to do any advertising campaigns, so you need to be clever in some ways. Yeah, of course. There's one example in Germany. I don't think they use it for marketing reasons, but it worked as a marketing reason. The use of swastikas in games was forbidden in Germany because of Nazi symbolics and stuff like that. But it was always allowed in film, because film is recognized as art. And so if you go to a few instances and explain your idea, you are able, if you place it in a historically correct context, you may use swastikas in films. And in games, it was never allowed. Every Wolfenstein game needed to censor out the swastikas in Germany. And there's one German game from an indie developer. It's called Through the Darkest of Times. It's an adventure about a resistance movement during the Third Reich. And of course, they needed to use swastikas for a historical context. They changed, they managed to change the law. So now games are allowed to use those symbols if they fulfill certain requirements, like historical context and political correctness, stuff like that. Like I said, I don't think they used this as a marketing instrument, but of course it created a lot of media around this topic. So people knew about this game because of the debate for the symbols, not because of the game itself. But I'm happy because it's a great game and they are nice people, and it's very, very cool that they made it. And so this is just a few examples what can work for your game.
Exactly, that's what I do in my videos, because I publish, game development tutorials. I publish rants about game development. Sometimes I intentionally make a mistake, like mispronounce a word or do something, because then people start talking about, oh, you did this. That brings up engagement and people talking about it, sharing stuff. Of course it's nothing offensive or something like that, but some like if you just create a video like now and you say compare Unity to Unreal, you say okay, Unreal is better, Unity is better, you will have people who's free, oh no, it's talking back and forth, and that is what is bringing your video, or in case of game, it will be your game up. So it's a very, very cool tactic, as you just said.
Yeah, of course, you need to decide for yourself if you want to be offensive. I don't want it. There's one case, this Columbine shooting. There was an RPG around that. And yeah, you can think of it what you want, but the fact is the game is known because it was offensive. I'm not telling anybody to be offensive. I don't want.
Yeah, we're just
I'm not
talking
offensive.
about
Yeah, you get the point.
what
But
methods people use.
what I'm saying is there are things that can work, and you need to think of things that you can. Yeah, that
do to make your game up. Yeah, what I advise people to do, and this is what I'm doing, like while I'm building my educational business, but also for the games that I plan to create and publish later on, is that I'm building a YouTube channel. You know, people follow me, people know me. Later on, when I start building the games that I have in mind, I'm going to like do devlogs. People love to see those videos, like you creating a game, talking about, oh, this is what I did today, this is what I want to change, so on and so forth. And these people will also give you feedback, what you can do, and a lot of them will also download your game. So that's also a great way to promote the game before you even create it. What I want to talk about or go back is to your game, the Bloo Kid. How, like, because you developed it everything on your own, how did you structure, how did you organize yourself? That's the most important thing, because as we talked earlier, it's easy to get started. You throw in a few plugins, you know, copy paste some code, you do some things, you already have a working player. But later on, when you progress in the game, the code can break. Did you think in the beginning how you can structure the code so that later on it will break? How did you organize yourself so that the project, like, you know, you don't get some infinite loop bugs?
Yeah, okay. So I need to go back one step. When what I said before, when I was a child, I grew up with the late 80s, early 90s home computers, where I started. I had a Commodore 64 with my brothers. I have two brothers, and there was no explanation for whatever related to game development. So we had one manual, and there were some code lines of code that you could type in the basic programming language, and suddenly you see stuff happening on your computer. And we didn't know any English language. We didn't know what was happening. We just typed in the code and look what happened, and then we tried changing the code to see what's the effect on this. That's how we started to learn coding. So the only thing when you wanted to create a game back then was to do everything on your own. It even the arcade games back then, they were like Pac-Man, Pitfall, whatever. The programmer was also the game designer, yeah, because there were no different roles. Yeah. The guy creating the code, he decided how the game would look, how the game would work. Yeah. So I had the luck, if you wanted, that I needed to learn all this stuff. Yeah, because there was no other way. And for Bloo Kid, I started to work on it, and I already had a lot of games that I've created in the past that nobody knows, and that, of course, I also had projects that were never finished. I started a lot of things and didn't finish it. I said it in the first place, you need to be able to finish things. That's a skill that you need to develop. Of course, not everyone starts and is able to do it. It's a process like everything you do. And to many people, the first Bloo Kid might look like a very small game. And of course, it's not a big game. You can compare it to Ori and the Blind Forest or whatever. But for a single person, it has a lot of stuff going on. And if I did not have the experiences I had before, I would not have been able to pull it off. So what I did was define a scope for the game. So I said, I want this amount of levels, this amount of worlds. I need this type of enemy and stuff like that. And one thing is, you need, of course, you need to think big, but don't think too big. If your scope is too big, you will never be able to finish it. And so I did this thinking for all the things that made up the game, like the code, the graphics, and the sound and music, and the levels. And code-wise, I started, like I said before, I started working on the core game loop. If I'm not able to make a character move across the screen, I don't need to create a main menu, a credit screen, whatever. You need to go step by step. And I used a framework back then that's called Corona SDK, that I've abandoned now because I come to that later, what I'm using at the moment as engines. But there was also a community around it, and it was great to see that you were able to have one code base and put out multiple platform releases, which is extremely important if you're a small company. that you're able to spread your game on as many platforms as possible with the least effort to create it. That's why, of course, Unity is great, because basically it's one click for Xbox, one click for Switch. Yeah, of course it's a bit more complex than that, but the idea is to not lose time coding for every single platform. And so what happened with BlueKit 1, BlueKit 1 is a one-screen platformer, so it doesn't scroll in any direction. And this was mainly because of a technical limitation of the framework, because the Android implementation of the Corona SDK was very slow. And when I created large levels or wanted to scroll it, it didn't perform very well on my phone. So I switched back to one screen. So there's always I guess you know Shigeru Miyamoto, who created the Mario and Zelda games. He said that often in his career, the technical limitations of a platform influence the game design that he created, because you know the Yoshi character that you can ride on in Super Mario World. It's my favorite example, because they wanted a riding animal, a dinosaur, whatever. And if you take a normal dinosaur where Mario sits on top, then it was too big for the sprites to display. So they chose an approach where it would fit into the limitations. And that's why Yoshi looks the way he looks, because it's basically a technical limitation. And that happened to BlueKit 1 as well. So I made it a one-screen platformer. And that also helped me to keep the game smaller. If I wanted scrolling levels, I had to create more content. And so the basic thing I say is to start small, and you can always get bigger at the end. But if you plan for a really big game, chances are you're never going to finish it.
Yeah, this is what I tell people all the time. Like, don't overthink, and don't I get a lot of people like, oh, I want to create a first-person shooter game. Calm down. You're just starting out. You cannot create a first-person shooter game. And that comes later. And even if you want to create something like that, it needs to be a smaller scope. But lay out the foundation, lay out what you want to create, and break it down into pieces. That way it will be easier for you to work on it, easier for you to think, because it's easier to think like, okay, I'm going to start with the character, make him move, animate him, then to think, oh, I need to have a character who's shooting enemies, avoiding. People, they tend to leave those projects, as you just said. That's the reason why they start. That's the reason why they abandon these projects. What I also want to talk about is, how do you plan to market your game? Like, is it fully released, the BlueKit, or you're in pre-release or in pre-order? How many downloads or sales did you got on Steam, and how do you plan to promote the game in
Okay,
general?
so what I did was, all my past games were released by myself, and I also published a version of BlueKit 2 on the Nintendo 3DS as under a self-publishing label, and as I'm also constantly learning stuff, and I don't know everything. Of course, nobody knows everything, and so I'm always open for experiments. And I had a blog in the past. Maybe you can share the link later in your video description. When I started with this whole independent game development stuff, I was writing a monthly report where I was talking about the games I've created, the stuff I made, the ideas I had about those keywords, Mario, stuff like that. And I always showed some numbers, how my games performed. And then I made experiments like just double the price on the game and see what happens. And I showed a chart where you can see this is the point where I doubled the price, and this happened to the downloads and the sales. So people could learn from the things that I tried. And just like I tried different things in the past, this time I wanted to work with a publisher who where I hope that he has a bigger reach when it comes to press releases or to coverage in general. So I teamed up with Head Up Games. They are a German publisher. They are not so many people. I think they are 12 people at the moment. And they have a very broad portfolio of games. So they are not limited to, we're just releasing first-person shooters or just games for the PC. They are very much experimenting, and they are very open for new ideas. So I talked to them, and the basic idea was,
how did you get in contact with them?
Okay, it's one of the things I wanted to give as a tip. If you want to get into game development, into companies, of course you need to get out and meet people. You don't need to meet them on LinkedIn or on Facebook. That's the thing where it starts, but you need to meet them in real life. maybe create some business cards for yourself so that people know who you are, and don't be afraid to talk to them, because in Germany there are events. I don't know how it's in your country, but
There are in capital.
yeah, exactly.
But Germany is not far away.
Yeah.
Germany is like 12 hours drive from where I am.
We really have local events every 2 months in bigger cities where indie developers meet to show their new games and to socialize and talk about. And there are always people from the games industry who on the one side are just interested in the games because they are gamers as well, and they are looking for talents. Yeah? So if you get out and talk to people, chances are you get contacts. So, and that's what happened to me. I knew that the CEO of Head Up Games was going to have a talk at one of those events. And like I said before, a friend of mine who I met in the games industry, he has worked for that company already. And so I told him, hey, just tell Dieter that I'm going to this event and maybe we can talk. And so my friend told the CEO, and I went there and we met and we talked. And he said, hey, look, I've got this game and I would like to do a physical release of this game, because Head Up Games have a label where they create physical collector editions. And he said, okay, the game costs $4 on the Nintendo 3DS. It's very hard to create a physical release that costs $20 or stuff to cover the cost for the manufacturing. But they could release it as a online download title. And then I said, okay, I'll try this. I've never released a game with a publisher before, so I'll do it for Bloo 2 for the Switch version. And that's how it all started. Yeah. And so the plans are now, the game is on pre-order since this Monday with a 20% discount, and it will be playable from next Monday on. And the discount will also last, I think, until the 2nd of December. And after that, it will be $5 for download. And I see how it goes. And the good thing is that Bloo 2 was first released in 2014, I think. And I've created it with a framework that's called Monkey X. And nobody knows this framework or this game engine. And it's at the moment, it's abandoned, unfortunately. But the idea was that it's a framework where you have your own programming language, and it translates the language into the target language for the platform that you're building. It translates to Java or to C++ or Objective-C, whatever. And then you can do a build for the target platform as a native binary. So you don't have a scripting language that is interpreted, but you really have a native binary for every platform. And the structure of Monkey X made it very simple for me to create additional targets like the Nintendo 3DS or the Nintendo Switch. So all you have to do is create code for the basic functions like displaying graphics, playing sounds, getting input from the hardware, and the rest stays in the main game code, and you don't need to change anything, for especially only stuff like if the GUI needs to look different on different platforms. But the core game code is always the same. It's like Unity, just as a programming language without editors. So I was able to create releases for the Ouya. I don't know if you remember it.
Is it still alive? Is that console still?
No. The Ouya is officially cancelled, I think. There is an Ouya Preserve project where they try to keep all stuff online for people who bought it on the platform, but officially it's dead. So, but it took me about 1 week to create a version for the Ouya, because the Ouya is Android based, and I already had an Android version. I just had to adjust some buttons and stuff like that. The Switch port took about a month. Yeah, so and the 3DS version also took 1 month to create, which is very, very fast, in my opinion, to cover a completely new platform. Of course, in Unity, you just switch the target, because Unity already has all these targets implemented. But if maybe there's a new platform that Unity can't handle from day one, I can take 1 month and create a version of my game, because I have full control over the targets myself. And that's, for me, it's very important not to be dependent on any other technique. So now the problem is that Monkey, as I said, is dead as well. So for my next games, I'm aiming to create my own engine again, because
So the latest, the Bloo Kit 2, which engine did you use to
It
create it?
uses this Monkey X framework. I
So
can
it
post
still
you.
it still uses that framework.
Yeah, the good thing is the license for Monkey X was you get the full source code, so you can always enhance the engine by yourself. For Unity, you don't get the Unity source code.
Yeah.
Yeah? You need to rely on future releases. If there's a bug that you need to be fixed, they need to do it. But
Yeah.
with Monkey X, if something is not working, I can dig into the code myself and fix it.
So
Yeah,
basically, you are managing the engine on your own if you want some update to your game. So if you have
exactly.
some,
Yeah, that's it. But for future releases, at the moment we have a Bloo Kit 3 announced that we're going to create in the upcoming year, and I'm going to create my own engine for this because on the one side I have enough experience to do it, and Bloo Kit 3 will mostly look like Bloo Kit 2 does. So I don't need a fully fledged 3D engine with all type of stuff. Of course, I want to add some visual effects and stuff like that, but the core technical things that need to go into the engines are you can count on one hand how much things you need. So it's quite easy to do this on your own.
how would you start? Like, I never tried to create my own game engine. How would you start to do that? Like,
Okay, so the funny thing is that I did this in the past because I was before I was working in the gaming industry. I was a hobby developer. I was working on games in my spare time when I was in school, and there, as I said, there was no engine at all. So if you wanted to create a game, you somehow had to create some basic stuff yourself. And everybody knows about OpenGL or DirectX, and every gamer has heard about it. The game needs OpenGL to run, but the gamers usually some know what it is. Many people don't know it. Basically, it's a programming application interface, an API that you can use to do graphic output or gamepad input on your own. So it's a piece between your operating system and your program that enables you to communicate with the system. Yeah, so you can load textures, you can render stuff. This is what I was talking about, that you need to know the basics. Of course, you don't need to know how a graphic card is working on the hardware side, but it's important to know that the graphics are made of vertices, they have a position, they have a color, what a vertex shader is, and basically what it does. It's important to know how these things work. And for me, I think it's personal luck that back in the day there was no Unity, because I was forced to learn these things if I wanted to make a game. And I released a freeware game that's called Hurricane. I can show you the link later. I don't know if you're familiar with the Hurricane gaming series. It's mostly in Germany, well-known gaming series from the Commodore 64 and the Amiga. It's a run and gun 2D platformer, like the Contra series. And it's extremely popular in Germany. And it was one of my absolutely favorite games on the Commodore 64. And it was the Turrican 1 was the reason why I started game development. And so it was no wonder that I created a Turrican game in my spare time when I was working as a hobby developer. And on this game, I learned everything I know about the basic game development today, because I needed to be able to load textures, to display stuff, to get the gamepad input. And I used the DirectX component because it is a Windows-only game. And now back to your question. If you start creating your own tech, of course, you need to decide, how do I say it, what dependency you are willing to use. So do you really want to create everything yourself, or are you using some library that is already able to display graphics and stuff like that? Not a fully fledged engine, but a piece like the middleware I mentioned before. Or if you're aiming really to do the OpenGL stuff completely on your own. That's your first decision that you need to make. And at the moment, I think the less things you use from other people, the better, because you don't have to rely on bug fixes from other people. You can do all the stuff on your own. But of course, it's harder because you need to do everything on your own. And so at my current experience level, I know how the things that I need to take into account for the future. But for beginners, I think it's hard to create an engine on your own. well, but of course there are a lot of tutorials online for OpenGL, how to render stuff and things like this. But if it comes to multi-platform development, what do I need to think of if I want the game to run on the Xbox and the Switch and maybe an Android phone later? That's the part where it can get tough. So it's go too much into detail there.
Yeah, it's definitely about experience, as you said, like creating all the games that you create, especially your own ones. You exactly know what you need. You exactly know how you're going to approach it. So yeah, but it's an interesting point. Like, you know, since you're an indie, I understand. And that's like what most big companies do. They create their own game engines exactly for the reason that you said, for the control over them. You don't have to rely on the next Unity update. You don't have to do this or do that. But it was interesting to hear that you as an indie, you plan to do that. So you're going to publish the third Bloo Kid with the same publisher?
I'm not sure at the moment. It depends on how well the Bloo Kid 2 release works out. If the publisher really brings the additional value that I hope it will bring. But of course, in the past, many game developers always said, hey, publishers are pure evil. Yeah, they just want the money. They give you no control. They say change this on the game and change that, and you sell your soul to the publisher. That's not true for every publisher, of course.
Yeah, of course.
They really want to make the most for the developer. They work together with you. They don't try to limit you in your ideas. They have really a great amount of trust in the developer, and that's great. So of course, when you're looking for a publisher, you can do your homework and check out who did they work with in the past. Maybe write an email to one of the companies who released a game with them and talk to them about their experiences. It's that connecting stuff that I mentioned earlier. So you get to know more game developers and stuff like that.
Exactly. That's how I feel like when you search for those things, like search for a smaller team, because if it's more corporate related, if it's a big company with a lot of employees and stuff like that, that's where the soul selling comes, as you said. That's where they want to squeeze the most out of it, because they only care about the money for the company to process. But like you said, like a smaller publisher, 12 people, you know, they don't have to earn millions and millions and millions of dollars to sustain the company, you know. So that's the main difference, what I can see from the market and from the game development world. So yeah, thank you very much. That was very educational, very entertaining to listen to you. I mean, with all the experience that you shared, especially starting way back like 20 years ago, working on all those titles, working and now going indie. It's especially the things that you shared about what it takes for you to get an actual job, because a lot of people think that you can only get a job with college, which is not true. I'm always telling people I'm a college dropout, but I tell people, like, if you can finish it. For me, college was not interesting because you don't learn interesting things there. It's not fun for you. As we're going back, it needs to be fun. So it needs to be fun and educational. So, but I'm telling everybody, if you want and you can, do it, but focus on learning the practical side, because that's what you need. As you said, you need a portfolio of projects and all of the good stuff. So yeah, thank you very much. I will put all the links for the people who are watching this or listening, if I put this on iTunes or if it becomes a really great podcast, you know, because this came out from a simple idea, but it will definitely be on my channel on YouTube. I will put all the links. I'll put the links to the Bloo Kid 2. I will also put the links to whatever, your Facebook. If you have a website, you will give me that later on. So that will be, you can contact Jorg, you can find him, you can download his game. For you guys, that's the link below. And yeah, thank you very much for participating.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. It was nice. We can continue this every time you like. Yeah.
Of course. We can, like, after you publish the game, we can talk about how it went, what you learned. Of course. Thank you very much again for taking the time, and see you again.
All right. Bye.